And welcome back to Between the Verses. It's me, Josh.
And I'm Maya. Thanks for being here with us again. As you know by now, this is a space where we talk about faith, the Bible, and everyday life. Honestly, thoughtfully.
And without pretending we have everything figured out.
So, what's on the agenda today, Josh?
Today we're talking about forgiveness.
Forgiveness, one of my favorite words.
And one of the central cornerstones of our faith. So you think it would come pretty naturally to us Christians, right?
Yeah, you certainly would.
Well, not necessarily. This is one of those topics that sounds simple in theory, like of course forgiveness is good, of course we should forgive. But the moment you have to do it, really do it, guess what? Things can get complicated.
Forgiveness is talked about a lot in the Bible as well as regular day-to-day life, but it's rarely easy because it usually shows up after something painful. Someone said something that stayed with you, someone broke your trust, or didn't show up when you needed them.
Little things stacking up over time which can lead to disappointment, resentment.
And real forgiveness asks us to let go of all of that negativity, which can be really hard.
Not to mention confusing, because are we supposed to forgive and just pretend a certain something didn't happen, something didn't matter? And does it always end in reconciliation? Is that the point of forgiveness, Maya, just to reconcile and move on?
The thing is, even when we truly want to forgive someone, we're not always sure what that even looks or feels like. And that's why I think this topic of the weight of forgiveness shows up in the Bible in such a human way. There's a moment in Matthew's gospel where Peter asks Jesus how many times he should forgive someone. He even suggests an actual number.
You can almost hear him doing the math.
He says something like, should I forgive them up to 7 times, which is actually pretty generous. The common teaching back then was to forgive 3 times.
Though Peter is basically doubling it and adding 1 for good measure.
He's trying to find the limit, a point where forgiveness stops being expected. And Jesus' response isn't what Peter is anticipating. Instead of setting a limit, Jesus basically removes it entirely. He says not 7 times, but 77 times. Or in some translations, 70 times 7. Either way, the point isn't the number. It's that you stop counting. Jesus takes Peter's question about limits and turns it into something much bigger, much more profound. Forgiveness is a way of life, not a quota.
And that's where it stops feeling theoretical. It moves from something you shouldn't really count to something you truly have to live.
That moment can make me a little uncomfortable.
Me too. Not because I don't understand it, but because I do. It asks something that feels, well, unrealistic, inauthentic when you're actually hurt.
Yeah, when forgiveness stops being a concept and starts being a daily posture, it gets real very fast.
Forgiveness in the Bible is never presented as something small. It's never brushed off or minimized. If anything, Scripture seems to acknowledge how incredibly hard it really is.
That's true. One of the things that stands out to me is that forgiveness is often connected to freedom, but freedom for the one forgiving.
Right, not freedom for the other person, but for you. That idea sounds nice, but it doesn't always feel true in the moment, does it?
It can feel very abstract when the hurt is still fresh. I remember a time when someone I trusted really let me down. It wasn't crazy dramatic, almost silly looking back on it, but it still felt deep at that moment for who I was and where I was in life, and it changed how safe I felt around them.
You experienced a shift in the relationship by the sounds of it.
And for a long time, I carried that around with me. I told myself I was fine. I told myself I'd moved on. But every time I thought about them, I felt tense. I replayed conversations in my head. I imagined what I should have said.
The mental reruns, they are the absolute worst.
They are, and of course I realized it slowly dawns on me that I hadn't forgiven them at all.
On the flip side, though, there's something about holding on to resentment that can feel protective. There's this thought, if you stay angry, you won't be hurt again.
It can feel like a shield of some kind, right? But over time, it just starts to weigh you down. It becomes exhausting.
Another thing the Bible makes clear is that forgiveness isn't the same as pretending nothing happened.
Yes, you mentioned that earlier. And that distinction matters so much because forgiving someone doesn't mean saying what they did was okay. It doesn't mean putting yourself back in an unsafe situation.
And it doesn't mean forgetting.
1,000%. A lot of people avoid forgiveness because they think it means letting someone walk all over them again, but that's not what Jesus is talking about.
And there's that line in the Lord's Prayer about forgiving others as we are forgiven. Funny though, that line used to bother me a little.
It felt conditional?
Yes, it felt like pressure, almost a test I might fail. But over time, I've started to see it differently. It's less about obligation and more about alignment.
Alignment. I like that. You mean choosing not to let bitterness shape who you become?
I'll be honest, there's someone in my life I still struggle to forgive. It's not because I don't want to, it's because the hurt hasn't fully healed yet.
And that's a real emotion for so many. Some days, forgiveness feels possible. Other days, it feels very far away.
Yes, I guess the Bible doesn't say forgiveness has to be instant. It's a process, which is a relief.
And sometimes it's a decision you have to make more than once. Sometimes you forgive and then realize you have to forgive again. The very same person, for the very same thing. What is the point of that? It's a struggle to make sense of at times.
Jesus talks about forgiveness in a way that assumes we'll struggle with it. That's why he talks about it so often, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary.
Because if we don't, or even can't forgive, something else starts to take root instead.
Bitterness, anger, all those little stories and thoughts we replay in our heads.
And if we're not careful, they quietly shape how we see people. They make us guarded and cynical. You start bracing for the next disappointment. You keep people at arm's length. It's a slippery slope.
There's a scene in the Gospel of Matthew, if I recall. We're told about a servant who owes his king some enormous debt. Something cartoonishly large that he could never realistically pay back in his lifetime. So the servant begs for mercy and the king wipes the debt entirely.
I know the one you're talking about, but the story turns right when the servant goes out himself to find someone who owes him money, a much, much smaller amount in comparison. And when that person asks for patience, the servant refuses. He threatens him and even has him thrown into jail.
Real classy, yeah. But as always with these stories, we're being told something important. We're not thinking in terms of money or debt anymore, but about grace and what it does or doesn't do inside a person.
The servant received forgiveness, but it hasn't changed him. And that's what Jesus is exposing here. Forgiveness that stops with us doesn't just stall, it hardens. Jesus ends the parable saying, if you've truly received mercy, it will begin to reshape how you treat others.
Which brings things full circle and back to real life. When we forgive someone for something, we are not just doing it for the benefit of that person. It's something we should do so that bitterness doesn't take root in us.
Right, it's not quick or easy necessarily, but refusing to forgive can come at a cost to your own peace, your own future.
Exactly right. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it usually does change the future. It changes how much space the past is allowed to take up, how loud it gets to be, how often it shows up.
And Jesus sometimes takes that very idea further than most of us are comfortable with. One of the most challenging things he does and asks of us is to forgive people who never apologize, people who don't admit they were wrong or don't even realize the harm they caused.
That's really hard. It feels unfair.
It does. But it also explains why forgiveness is so powerful. That doesn't mean accountability doesn't matter, but it does show that forgiveness isn't always dependent on the other person changing or understanding or saying the right words back at you.
When you forgive, you're choosing to stop letting someone else control your inner world. You're choosing peace over replaying the same pain.
And that choice can take time, sometimes a lot of time. Forgiveness isn't something you can schedule or tick off a list. It's a process, like we said. Slow, uneven, always personal.
But it's a process that ultimately has to begin, even in some small way.
Though that eventually it can actually end.
And you can move forward with a clear conscience and be freer indeed. So, as we come to the end of this conversation, maybe there are a few things worth holding on to here. I hope so anyway. Like, always remember that forgiveness is not weakness. Neither is it denial. And it's not something you owe anyone immediately.
And forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's something that unfolds over time. And slowly, often quietly, it can loosen the hold that hurt has on you.
If you're listening and there's someone you're struggling to forgive, know that you are not failing at faith. Not at all. You're human.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the most powerful images of forgiveness in the Bible is Jesus on the cross. In the middle of being mocked and betrayed, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That moment sits at the center of Christian faith, not as a soft, sentimental idea, but as something costly, difficult, and deeply human.
When we're deciding whether or not to forgive someone in our own lives, that moment on the cross matters. Not as a pressure or guilt trip, but as a picture of what forgiveness looks like at its most honest, courageous, and transformative.
So, wherever you are with forgiveness right now, whether it feels impossible, unfinished, or just beginning, that's okay, because you're not behind, you're not failing, you're just human. The Bible is full of people who struggled with forgiveness long before they ever embodied it. Think of Joseph, who forgave his brothers, but only after years of pain and distance.
And David writes psalms that wrestle honestly with anger before they ever reach peace.
And Jesus himself shows us often that forgiveness is not a moral perfection. It's a posture of the heart, slowly learned.
It takes as long as it takes. Sometimes forgiveness is simply loosening your grip, just enough to breathe again, a first step toward letting go.
And maybe that's enough. A small step, a pause, a moment of grace.
And that is enough for today. A nice moment to end, at the cusp of a new beginning.
Thanks for spending this time with Josh and I. We know these conversations can stir things up. We're grateful you're here.
Until next time, take care of yourselves. Be gentle with your heart.
And we'll be seeing you next time on Between the Verses.